Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Friday morning space show program. This, of course, is West Coast time. I am your host, David Livingston. Thank you very much for tuning in. An exciting program today with journalist, science journalist, space journalist as well, Sarah Scoles. And don't forget, we archive on the Space Show site, Substack, YouTube, and Vimeo. Um, Also, we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit and we're listener supported. So if you like what we do, we ask you to help us and support us. The easiest and best way is PayPal on the right side of our Space Show homepage, thespaceshow.com. But we also do Zoom. Note that Zoom uses a special email address, david@onegiantleapfoundation.org. That is our parent 501(c)(3). It also gives our Las Vegas office's address if you want to go old school and mail us a check payable to One Giant Leap. For those of you that like to participate in funding operations off of Substack, you're certainly welcome to do that. And you're also welcome to just open up our website and use PayPal. And as I said, we're listener supported. We appreciate you doing that. We do have sponsors. And if you're interested in being a sponsor, email me at drspace@thespaceshow.com. We've got AIAA, Helix Space in Luxembourg, the National Space Society, Celestis, Astrox, which is Dr. Kathari, right? And Dr. Benaroya, the Atlantis Project, which is Phil Swan right here, Artless Entertainment out of Los Angeles, and John Jossi is not with us, but he has the fabulous Space Settlement Progress blog. Our guest today is Sarah Scoles, and she has been on the Space Show several times. She's a Colorado-based science and space journalist. She contributes to Scientific American and many other articles and publications, New York Times, Wired, Popular Science, the WAPO, and many others. She has a full bio on our website. Her website is simply sarahscoles.com. I would urge you to check on it. And Sarah, welcome back to the Space Show. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
And listeners, by the way, we're on a variable time slot per day, just that you will know that. I wanted to start out, Sarah, with your article from October, Scientific American, how a billionaire's plan to reach another star fell apart. An abandoned plan to visit another star highlights the perils of billionaire-funded science. So this is Breakthrough, which we covered a lot on the Space Show. Their physicist, Dr. Phil Lubin from UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, was a guest on the show. Pete Wharton has been a guest many, many times. Zach Manchester, I did not know he was with Breakthrough until I read your article, but he was on the show as a graduate student at Cornell because he figured out how to design a CubeSat and made it public on YouTube, which was a huge hit. And in a way, he contributed to academic breakthroughs on getting students interested in building CubeSats and things like that. So he was a big part of Breakthrough too. And as I said, I was getting people on the show. Pete Wharton was coming on with updates frequently. Uh, I tried to get Lubin on, and he always said he didn't have any more time, even though he said he would be willing to come on. And now I understand it's gone dormant, and I did not know it had gone dormant. So we were all looking forward to Breakthrough and talking about it as a possibility for serious interstellar flight, not for humans, of course, but for little tiny wafers. Um, why did you decide to go explore Breakthrough? And maybe for those who haven't read your article, and it is behind a paywall on Scientific American. You can summarize what you found out.
Sure. Yeah, the article actually started with the idea of looking at various interstellar spaceflight projects over time and what was difficult about them, like what they had found and why they didn't always survive or, take a journey to another star. And then I was talking to my editor at Scientific American, and she said, well, what about if we just focused on the most public, best funded one that probably had the greatest shot of success, which was Breakthrough Starshot? And she pointed out, like you said at the beginning, everyone was following it. There was a lot of press, and a lot of money, a lot of talk, and then it just kind of quietly disappeared. So she said, "Why don't you go find out what happened?" And yeah, for people who might not be familiar or who might have forgotten, Breakthrough Starshot was this plan funded nominally to the tune of $100 million to use laser propulsion to send very small spacecraft to the nearest star system. And so they amassed this group of, very prominent, renowned researchers to look at different aspects of that and try to develop the technology, figure out if it was feasible, and then maybe go on to build it. But what I found out in my article is that those researchers they did do the things. They made a lot of progress learning about lasers, a lot of progress learning about the spacecraft themselves that David mentioned. Zach Manchester was working on and other aspects of the plan, but it did still look like it was going to take a lot more money and a lot more time. And when that became apparent, I think, to the funders of the project, they, kind of it seemed like they didn't just quietly disappear from going on the space show. Like the members of the actual team hadn't heard from them in a while, so it just kind of fizzled out after it proved more difficult than they perhaps thought at
Who
first.
funded it other than Yuri Milner?
Well, it was Yuri Milner's money and the through the Breakthrough organization,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, I believe it was all his money.
Your article points out that Lubin and others started thinking about applying some of what they were doing to completely other projects, not necessarily related to breakthrough. So there seems to me there might have been a lot of distractions or a lot of attention maybe being given to other work that people could do rather than breakthrough. And maybe that contributed to it, but it also was a really big task. And the technology was not necessarily available to anytime soon to do what they wanted to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Phil Lubin had initially become interested in this sort of laser technology actually for, planetary defense, for taking out objects that might be coming toward Earth from from space. And I think, all of the people who worked on Breakthrough also had other jobs. They were professors or they were working on other projects. It was never their full-time job. So I'm sure that played a role also.
For those in the audience, feel free to break in, especially if you're familiar with Breakthrough. Uh, it inspired a lot of people. They really got off on the fact that there was finally a plausible interstellar technology, even though everybody that I talked to realized that this really wasn't for humans and that it had some fundamental flaws, like it would fly by so quickly because of its speed, and you had no way to slow it down. So your photography was very limited, but it was exciting. I mean, I we had listeners and callers like those that are with us today that were really truly excited, and I still even today get people saying, we got a plausible interstellar transportation method, but yeah, I guess it's not fizzled out. I guess it could be rejuvenated if it got an influx of big capital.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll just say one thing really quick, Jim, and then pass it over to you.
Yeah.
The researchers themselves were also very inspired by it, and their students, I think, also who were helping with the research, just being able to take like fundamental science questions like how can we make this laser more efficient, or how can we build this very thin light sail for the laser to, push up against, in the service of going to another star. Like that's very compelling, not just to, us and the public, but also to the people working on it. And I do think a lot of them are continuing in some way on it. Like Phil Lubin is for sure continuing his work on it, even without the money. But it's always harder when you don't have $100 million than when you do, theoretically. So.
Yeah, Jim, you want to say something?
Yes, let me begin by talking about the history because I think the article and the discussion here today doesn't understand that the original concept was by Robert Forward in 1961, who quantified it with Freeman Dyson in 1982, leading to my interest in it. And I flew sails in the laboratory on a microwave beam 25 years ago. And so there's a lot of work that was done before Breakthrough. But the context that Lubin and company presented in is started just like 10 years ago. That's just is not the case. What's more, the I think that the article in Scientific American it has the wrong tenor to it because, and I think it's because Sarah couldn't talk to the major people who were in it, such as myself. Well, she never reached out to me. She could have talked to me, but the breakthrough people tend to be very, very quiet, very secretive. And I can explain to you a lot about what's actually happened in the program that isn't known publicly. I worked on it for 8 years and I started on it before it was even announced. Um, the the essential thing is that the phase, what we're talking about is phase one of the Starshot project. Phase one was to find out, are there any showstoppers? And we know that in the laws of physics, you could do this, but can you technologically was the question. And what they found was that there aren't any showstoppers, and therefore phase one was successful. It came to an end in the spring of 24, and with a successful final report, which has not been released publicly, and I can speak to that separately. The basic conclusion is it is feasible to do it, and it's feasible to do it for the $10 billion original cost estimate. If the cost of lasers can be driven down by commercial applications, which seems likely. So I think that what it showed is that it's a practical approach. And also, let me put it this way: there were four basic problems. The first is, could you build a coherent phased array of lasers sufficiently coherent at a reasonable cost to be able to drive this sail to such high accelerations? The answer appears to be yes. In fact, there's a module of it has been built and demonstrated. The second problem was, could you find a material that could survive the acceleration and yet maintain the very high reflectivity with almost no absorption of the radiation in order for it to not heat up and therefore basically come apart? The answer to that is yes. And it appears the best material is silver nitride. The third problem was, can the sail stay on the beam naturally in a stable way? Can it do what is we call beam riding? Can it ride on the beam naturally without any kind of feedback loop to the ground, which is impossible over a mission of this sort? There isn't enough time because the instabilities would be so fast you couldn't do it, correct it from the ground. The answer also appears to be yes, and then there are several ways to make it work in beam riding. And the most, to me, astonishing result of the program was that you could actually, with modern fabrication techniques, with being able to microfabricate surfaces on a very fine scale, you can build a flat sail that will stay on the beam. I had originally thought and did experiments with conical sails, which can be stable on the beam because there's a restoring force if it gets off the beam. But the fact that you could do it with a flat sail, which is much easier to fabricate, was quite an amazing result for me. Then a fourth problem, which was underemphasized when we began, was can you get the data back? Can you get the data back over 4 light years and a data rate that allows you to correct much information. That led to some real that problem is a real constraint. And the answer seems to be you could do it with technologies we understand if you don't go at 2/10 of the speed of light. Because of the scaling of how this acceleration works, if you reduce the speed from, say, 20% to 10%, you can afford 16 times as much mass in a sail, and that allows you to build a transmitter that will give you information back on a time scale that's practical to a large receiving antenna on Earth or in space. And that fact is, in fact, solves the fourth problem. So that phase one was successful in saying, is there a credible technical path to do this? Now, at that time, my estimate is, in contrast to Phil Lubin's, who frankly wasn't very central to the program at all, nor was Zach Manchester, or certainly not Mae Jemison or Kelvin Long, who were quoted extensively in the article.
I didn't actually talk to Mae Jemison at all. She's not quoted at all in
Yeah,
the, oh,
exactly. She's
I'm sorry.
completely uninvolved.
Oh,
She's the, I hate to say it this way, she's the diversity hire for the program. Uh, I know Mae Jameson very well, and she made no contribution to the program. The the other what happened at the end of phase one was that they're looking for money for phase two. Phase one, in my estimate, spent about $25 million, much more than Phil Lubin thinks. You couldn't have that many meetings with that many people, that much travel expense, and what are now between 50 and 100 scientific papers by 35 different organizations for $4.5 million. Doesn't compute. The phase two is going to is the plan is to center the work at Caltech with subcontractor organizations that would carry it on, directed by Larry Atwater. And they're looking for funding for that, and that's estimated to cost another 100 million. And that would result in laboratory demonstrations of the basic technologies, such as beam riding and the extremely high accelerations under laser beams. And then there would be in-orbit demonstrations of certain aspects of the program, including deployment of the sail. A diaphanous sail weighs a few grams is really hard to deploy stably. And then acceleration from the ground at lower accelerations, of course. I should note that the kinds of accelerations which are in order 10 to the fourth, like 30, 40,000 Gs, is routinely achieved in artillery shells, which contain electronics these days, and has been a technology we've had for a long time. So the acceleration is not really the problem. So I think that phase two, which would start lower velocity missions to the outer solar system at perhaps 100 kilometers a second velocity, which is in excess of anything you can get with chemical rockets. It would be a multi-year program that they're trying to find funding for. And I think that therefore, let's put it this way, the work goes on, the hope still lives, and the dream of beam-driven interstellar travel is still alive and will likely be the only way we can send probes to stars in this century.
Let me jump in for a minute because, um, and Sarah, this is for you. Of the people she talked to, they don't provide her with this information. And as you yourself said, most of it maybe not published, like the final report. But at the end of her article, she does get opinions from Warden and from Lubin, and I think there was one or two others on what they assessed the value of Breakthrough to be. And Sarah talked to them, and she did talk to them, and
Yeah.
they don't talk like you do. So, as a journalist, and you're looking into this, if the people themselves don't see the project they're on, like you're talking about, what the hell do you expect for people to do in writing an article because the people themselves aren't aren't helping the journalist. And this is not a political article.
No, well, you're entirely correct. We have to understand that assessing a system as complex as Starshot is a challenge to a journalist with a deadline. Uh, it would take years to read and absorb the relevant literature and to reconcile and make coherent an understanding of the system as a whole on a deadline. And so I think she did the best job she could with the information she was given.
I
Sarah, did
mean,
you have a deadline? Did
I mean,
I,
I worked on this for quite a long time. It wasn't a quick turnaround story, and I mean, I actually think Jim and I agree on a lot. And I'm not sure how recently he read the article, but I actually get
I read
into a
it
lot
this
of the
morning.
I get into a lot of the things that you talked about. Like I get into the four problems. I get into things
Yeah,
like discovering
yeah,
the
true.
most likely material. I get into progress on all of the four problems, and I say that
Hmm.
the team didn't discover showstoppers. Like I think we're actually on the same page. And
Yeah,
I didn't the two people who you mentioned who I quoted extensively, I don't believe I quoted at all because I didn't interview them. Mae Jemison and I think you said Helen Cook.
yeah.
So, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, my problem as a journalist and someone who is, representing the interests of the public is that Breakthrough made a big splash when they
Hmm.
came out and said, we're giving $100 million to this. There was lots of publicity for that, lots of talk
Hmm.
of the money, and whether they spent a few million, like Lubin estimated, or 25 million, that's a lot less than 100 million.
Yeah.
And to say you're going to do all these things, make that public, and then disappear and refuse to answer questions for the public, I think is not very responsible. And if they want, more detail out, like the report you're talking about, the breakthrough press person promised me
Yeah.
in like February of last year and then never provided. Like
Right.
we were waiting on that for a very long time. Like they had the opportunity to give me the
Yeah.
information, and said they would and did not. And that's
you
uh,
know,
not on
Okay.
me.
Milner funded 4 projects. So
Mhm.
I don't know if the 100 million was for all four or just 100 million was supposed to be breakthrough, but he did Breakthrough Listen, which was a group of
Okay.
radio telescopes that I think that's operational, but we never ever hear about it. And then he had two other breakthrough prize awards or things that he funded. And it's been so long since I got anybody to talk about breakthrough on the show that I've actually forgotten. Maybe some of the listeners remember the other breakthrough
I
project.
I can explain. Those four projects are a rough estimate, 100 million each. Um, Breakthrough Listen has been extraordinarily successful. They've collected somewhere between something like 100 to 1,000 times as much data, listening data, as
Uh-huh.
all the work before them, and they've got an interesting initial conclusion that they're not hearing anything. That is an answer. The It's not a final answer, but it has
But
produced
it
real
is a
results.
yeah, it is an answer.
Yeah. The other things are, well, Sarah, I read your article an hour ago. So I remember you're completely correct. All that stuff is in there. That's right. And the problem that Breakthrough had fundamentally, from my point of view, was poor communications, both internal communication and external communication. And it's been poor, and that's a killer for a R&D program. I've done like 50 R&D programs in my, I'm in the last, what, 55 years. I'm 85 years old today, by the way. So
Oh,
Happy
happy
I go
birthday.
birthday.
back a long way. And one thing, this is incredibly important for R&D, is communication. And Breakthrough is very poor with that and doesn't communicate to the world, doesn't communicate internally. And I don't understand why. And why has this final report, which was the drafts were written 2 or 3 years ago, the final was a year and a half ago. Why hasn't it been released? It's a really good document, 46 pages, and it should be released because it would explain so much to people about what's been done, including in detailed technical information, timelines of what the funding would cost, what the various phases should be, It's all there. And I should mention that I'm writing all this up. It'll appear on Paul Gilster's Centauri Dream site starting in a week or two in two parts. The first is a critique of Sarah's article and thoughts about why the breakthrough starshot is not understood or known well, and what should be known about it. And then a technical review of what it achieved. It's a much longer second piece. So keep tuned to Centauri Dreams and you'll see a lot of what I have to say about that.
Um, Sarah, what happens when you do an article like this and the people don't give you the information, or the key people won't sit for an interview? Is it because they're afraid of the press, because they're afraid it'll be a hit piece on them? What's Can you ascertain why? I think when I go to get guests on the space show, and a lot of them, like, I've never gotten a member of Congress on the show, and it's very hard to get big aerospace people on. And I think it's because it's a live program and they don't want to get live comments and questions from people. They'll speak at a space conference, and that seems to be controlled because most of the people at a space conference are are generally supportive. And even if they get a renegade question, it's contained within that room, and they don't usually, make tapes and things. Not always. Sometimes they do, but I think they don't want to face a live audience. What is your reasoning for why people don't sit with you, or want to be interviewed, or something like this, and which is a risk for the journalists because they may not be able to tell the full story or to tell the story accurately.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say for sure for Breakthrough specifically, but I do think in general when people don't want to talk to journalists, I mean, either they don't see the value in it, like they would rather do their own communications or not communicate at all, or yeah, they would like to control their own message and not have random questions from a random person. I mean, I think it's been a minute since the article was published, so I can't remember the exact quote, but I did try to get in touch with lots of the higher up people, and it was the Breakthrough organization and the heads of that who said like you can't talk to this person, and that was why I went, down the list to people who were doing the work. But I do think I would disagree with Jim that I didn't talk to people who were important to the project. Pete Warden is in the story. Some of the researchers I spoke to, they were working on key technologies. And in the report that I do have that's published in a book, I think last year, the people I quoted were the people whose papers, were doing the research to address those four problems. So they may not have been the strategic leaders, but
They
they were
were.
doing published research funded by Breakthrough, supported by Breakthrough, that was working toward the four problems. And I mean, I think that's important, the people on the ground doing the work. So I would disagree.
Well, Sarah, you did what you could, but you didn't actually talk to Pete. Either one of the Pete's there too.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant the other sorry, you're right. I did not talk to Pete
Yeah.
Warden. I
Uh,
spoke to yeah.
I can speak to why it's secretive. It's because Yuri Milner is secretive. He's a Russian. He's an Israeli citizen as well. He has this extensive security detail. I'll tell you, he's a billionaire. Yeah, all right. A week or two ago, the East Bay Times and the Mercury Sun here in San Francisco Bay Area published a list of the 200 billionaires that are in California who are the the Democratic Party is trying to tax them. There's a new bill about that. And Yuri Milner wasn't on the list. He lives in California. He doesn't want to be on the list.
I tried to interview him many times and I could not get to him.
It's a secretive organization, frankly, and it's very poor with internal and external communications. I worked on it for 8 years, and I had to do my own communications. It wasn't a central hub for it.
Yeah.
Marshall, you have a question?
Also,
Hi,
sorry, can
hi,
I jump? I just want
go
to
ahead.
address one thing I misspoke. When I said I spoke to Pete Worden, I meant to say I spoke to Mason Peck, NASA's former chief
Yeah,
technologist, who was,
yeah.
I think, important to strategy. That was just a
He was
sorry.
very
Jumping.
important,
Yeah.
very important.
Marshall, go
Mason was
ahead.
Yeah.
fundamental. Yeah.
Um, Here's a change of pace. I'm a software engineer, and one of the things I specialized in was the economics of budgeting a software project. Almost all of them were leading edge, so you really didn't know where it was going, but you have to produce a budget in the proposal to get the government to do anything.
Yeah.
So my question, and you made a very good point there, how much publicity and information is required by an R&D space program? You'd think there's kind of a budget out there for it. And if it's not, that's a problem with the project or, and I worked on some classified stuff that, the budget for communication with the Pentagon was like, oh yeah, maybe 5%. But an open project like you're talking about, boy, that's an area I have no clue on. How much do you think they should spend on that kind of uh, publicity for R&D?
Well, that's a good question. Let me say that of all the things I've written, 180 scientific papers, 10 books, 10 science fiction stories, the most creative fiction I have written is the budget part of my technical proposals to the government. Okay. It's a very demanding form of fiction. So the budget estimates are hard to do, but I can recommend that the most unheralded, at least in this article, contributor to Starshot is Kevin Parkin, who did an extensive model of what the system would cost, both in capital and operational costs, and that is publicly available. And it's in that book that Sarah referenced in her paper, her article, and he shows that you can build Starshot for $10 billion if the cost of lasers drops enough, because the major cost is in the beamer, not the sail. Um,
Mhm.
and that follows on the initial analysis that I did way back in 2010 about how you scale these devices. Um, and there are simple rules of thumb. You spend half the money on the beamer and half on the aperture of the beamer and half the money on the power that goes into the beamer, and then 0.1% on the sail. That's what it turns out to be.
Sarah, a question for you. When you write these kinds of articles, what do you do as a journalist to make sure you understand the tech enough to where you can do a competent interview with the people actually doing the tech? Because if you don't really understand what they're doing or talking about, I would imagine the interview would be, not so relevant. So you have to do something to understand the physics they're talking about, light sails, wafers, speed of light, stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, before I talk to anyone, I do extensive background research on the technology they'll be talking about in general, and then on their specific work on it, papers they've published, their own informal writings, things like that, maybe talks they've given. I try to, I do, I'm not a professional physicist or anything, but I do have an undergraduate degree in physics and astronomy, so I'm not coming from nowhere. And so and then I mean, when you're speaking to someone, obviously an expert will speak at an expert level naturally, but you can, as a journalist, it's also your job to ask questions to say like, can you take that down a notch? Can you explain it a little more, like I am a college student or, someone without background. Can you get back to the basics and do that? So, um, both of those things.
Hmm.
Oh, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand up. Uh,
No,
I,
not me.
I guess
Uh,
not.
I have a comment. Um, I think part of my reaction to the article that Sarah wrote is the title, Voyage to Nowhere. That's an analogy to the bridge to nowhere in Alaska, the train to nowhere in California that's still under construction and probably will always be. So Voyage to Nowhere is odd because the stars are hardly nowhere. No, what it means is it implies failure. And Scientific American is known for certain biases, like the third word in the article is billionaire. The Scientific American doesn't like billionaires in in science. And Scientific American didn't like the Strategic Defense Initiative in the 1980s, the Golden Dome.
Mhm.
From now, they don't like geoengineering, and they recently, like in the 24 election, started recommending political candidates for election. So they're out of Boston, and it's understood that they have a bias in some things. And I think that the title biases the article more than the article itself.
Sure. I mean, I do not, I'm a freelancer. I don't work
Yeah.
for Scientific American. I don't, their biases are not my own. And also, I'm sure you know that the journalists who write articles don't write the titles for the articles, somebody else does. But I mean, what Breakthrough promised in its initial hype, which they did, they did spend a lot of money on communications to announce the project. Like they rented out a very expensive building. They had an
Yeah.
extensive
Mhm.
communications to talk about what they were going to do, and their promise was not small. They were, going to demonstrate a proof of concept. And I think the things they've done are laudable. I think there's a lot of important research that's been done, like you pointed out, and that they didn't find showstoppers. But I don't think that the organization delivered monetarily or scientifically on the kinds of things that they talked. I don't think it was a failure objectively, but I think it was not, they did not deliver what was promised and didn't talk about that. They talked about what they were promising, and then when it wasn't working out exactly as quickly or as cheaply as intended, didn't talk about that.
Okay, let me comment on that. The good news might be that they actually reached the conclusion that there are no showstoppers by spending only 25 million and not 100. Now they need another 100 million to go to phase two, and they're looking for it now. And somehow $100 million is not easy to find in some places.
Why can't they just use the 75 that they didn't spend yet then?
I'll speculate here. Yuri Milner is very cautious, and he's worried about Putin.
Why
Uh,
would he be worried about Putin? He's not in, are his assets in Russia?
Putin gets people killed in all over the place, and not just in Ukraine, but in England and Germany. He Yuri maintains a substantial security detail. The and I think he's just gone to Earth, and that's why you don't see him on a list of billionaires anymore, because he doesn't want to be visible. I've noticed that I follow in the Wall Street Journal, they have a list of people who were spoken about in every issue every day. Milner disappeared in that list
Yeah,
about
I've
five
never
years
seen
ago.
his name in recent years. I thought maybe he wasn't a
If you go back
billionaire.
10 years, he was in there every month or two. Now he isn't visible at all, and it's not even quite known which one of his houses he lives in. Um, but I think that's part of the motivation of the failure to communicate. And it's a shame because the program really produced results. And I'm going to try and make that clear in the Satari Dreams piece I'm writing.
Guys, I don't want to spend the whole show on
Yeah.
Breakthrough. I want to ask Sarah a bunch of other questions about her space work and uh, what she thinks of interviewing people in the space community for space stories over the years. Do you see a change? Do you think that you're getting a sense that the space community, the entrepreneurial or even the public sector is really moving forward in space development and what areas of space development? What is your sense on that? Because you've been covering space and tech for a long, long time. How do you assess it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest areas of development that I've seen since I started covering, and I used to cover this topic a lot for Wired, is, low Earth orbit constellations of satellites doing either, communications or Earth observation. I think we can all agree that we've seen an explosion in that, and also in the companies on the ground that are, using that space data to learn things about the world from, safety and national security to weather to all of that. So I think in terms of, money making business, that seems to me like one of the bigger things. And I think, there's obviously a lot of interest in human space flight these days, private and public, especially with, the Artemis program, hopefully making some progress, I think, in not too long, just some days. And I think that people, regular people are excited about those aspects of things. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs in the space. An interesting turn that I've seen from them is a lot of companies that start as, aimed at the civil sector, have ended up turning more toward defense work, national security space, because that's where the money is. Like entrepreneurs can start out saying, we're just doing this commercially, but the Space Force and other national space security places are where the actual money is. So, not making a judgment on that, just I think that that's a thing that happens. But you all have been observing it for longer than I have. So, what are your thoughts?
Do they
Well,
seem the people that you talk to, they seem really up on things, competent, or is it driven by dreams and fantasies, but they're able to get easy money, raising money these days for some of these ventures. It appears to me that there's a lot of easy money around. It used to be called funny money, but it's available. And, nobody, this would be a great article for you. Look at the last 5 years of uh, entrepreneurial space companies that get funded and how much, and how many exist today, and how many are doing the business they raised the money to do. And
Yeah.
I wonder, I suspect there'd be a pretty big failure rate, and that a lot of them took the money and ended up having to do something else because they couldn't either do the tech of what they wanted to do, or they found out that the tech they wanted to do wasn't going to pay the lights and the plumbing bill and the water bill. And if they were in California, it wasn't going to pay the minimum tax that a corporation has to pay in California. Joe?
As my experience of having invested in space companies since 1999, it's almost never the tech.
Mm.
Like the tech, the people who start space companies are much more conscious of technology and the limits of technology, and what is at the edge of current performance and what might be 5 years away at the edge of current performance, than they are about fundraising. And so it just shocks me now the amount of money that is being poured into space companies at this point, considering how hard it was to raise like very small amounts of money
Well,
20
are
years.
they competent to get the job done? What's the success and failure rate if you look at the last 5 or 6 years of this? I'd love to see an article on that with substantive research if you want to go into the financial world and check that out. But my hunch is there's a pretty high failure rate or a use of the money other than what they said they were going to use it for. I don't mean sleazy and crooked. I mean where they're going to build, super rubber bands, and they end up, building electric car motors or
Yeah.
something.
Let me comment on that. Of technical technical businesses typically have too many participants at the beginning. A century ago, there were dozens and dozens of automobile companies in the United States. Right today, in electric vehicles in China, there are 150 companies. How many will be there in 5 years? Maybe 10 or 20. The elimination of early low performers, for whatever reason, is a common development in technology industry. And that is it's true in air conditioning. I mean, it's not just space. So I think the basic thing is that the people who start these kind of companies are, as Joe says, big on tech, don't understand economics.
Uh, Marshall?
I was going to ask, when you go to the different space conferences and you listen to uh, each person's little talk and so on like that, uh, how long does it take to sort out the hocus pocus people from the really hard scientist who's really coming in and pointing to a breakthrough? And you go to a conference, you want to go to the really hardcore breakthroughs and not the comedy acts.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean it's always a hard problem as, somebody like Joe, I think you said you were investing in space companies, like you're always sort of taking a gamble, like is this the one that's going to work out or is it sort of vaporware? And I think, I mean, honestly, one of the differentiators for me, which is maybe ironic for a journalist, is if their communications are too slick too early. Like if they, if they've got too good a PR pitch but they haven't actually built any hardware. They don't have a software demonstration, but they've put a lot of focus on how they communicate about it. Ironically, that's a red flag for me because I'm like, no, you should go back to the lab and
Yeah.
keep working on those circuits or things
Um,
like that. But it's actually my policy generally to not write about companies before they've actually produced something. If they just have an idea, they can email me later when they've actually done something, and until then, I don't write about them. So,
I've said this on many space shows because I get all these PR things that people wanting to do a show. So my rule is if all you're doing is announcing new personnel or phase one funding or something like that, call me back when you have built something and demoed it, even if the demo is a failure
mhm.
because raising money or adding personnel to your company isn't worth the airtime for me to report. And I will go look at their websites, every one of these, and I click on team. And some of these people have 30 members on their team. But they've had a successful phase one raising the money and they got a team of 30 people but there's nothing about what their business is that they're doing. And I see this all the time. And they want coverage because they have a new employee or they hire Joe Blow, who's going to be their new VP of laser technology or something, or that they just completed um, something that's before phase one funding or so. And it's worse now than ever before. And I don't give them airtime. I used to reply to all of them, but now I seldom reply. But I'm sure do they come to you wanting you to write articles about them? And are they seeking publicity from outside by someone such as yourself, or do they know to stay away from you because they don't have shit to talk about?
no, they still come to me without shit to talk about. I probably get a lot of the same emails as you. And I took the same trajectory as you also. I used to reply and explain why I wouldn't be having this person on, like say, you know, I'm a journalist. I write about, these space technologies when they are, when the development is of interest to the public, because that's who I'm writing for. And you hiring Joe Blow is not, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody also cares how much money you raised. And yeah, now I just archive the emails
Mhm.
also.
What turns you on the most about covering space?
Sorry.
What turns you on the most about covering space?
I mean, I've been interested in space since I was very young. I grew up very close to Kennedy Space Center, and so I was always watching things launch since I was a a kid, wanted to be an astronaut for a long time. And so I think, just thinking that we live on a tiny part of the universe and there's this whole rest of it out there that we can study from Earth with telescopes or, go visit ourselves and that's, possible for humans, I think is just it's an exciting idea. And now that, space is also commerce and its defense and like it's really central to our life on Earth. It's not something separate from it, I think is important too.
Do you do policy? For example, we don't have a national space council right now, and probably unless Vice President Vance gets a hair up his rear end or something, we're likely not going to have a national space council. Do you cover things like that on the policy side, or do you sort of stick with tech?
No, I cover policy sometimes. I haven't written a space policy story in a little while. I think my most recent ones were about things like, space traffic management, and
Mhm.
those kinds of policies. But you're giving me a lot of story ideas here. The National Space Council, that's a good one.
I think many of us were optimistic that we would have a really active, good Space Council because we did not have one with Vice President Harris involved. And I don't know the history of why National Space Council seemed to be run by vice presidents, but maybe someone else knows the history of why that seems to be a VP job. But if the VP isn't interested in it, why? Isn't it possible to have somebody who is interested in it being the head of the National Space Council? But that doesn't seem to happen. I think it's important if it's got good leadership. Um, so I don't know. I missed that. Um, do you cover anything like the UAP program or the UAP news and what's with all of this kind of stuff, or do you sort of stay away from that end of it?
I mean, I have in the past, I haven't in a couple of years probably, I haven't written a UAP article. I think maybe the last one I wrote was about NASA's research plan into what they could do to help the efforts to learn more. But yeah, I actually wrote a book. I think we maybe talked about it a few years ago about the history of UFOs and the U.S. government and culture and things like that. And so why we're obsessed with it. And then after that, I covered a few of, when the Defense Department was starting up their UAP research program and collecting reports and publishing reports. I covered a bit of that, but it seems maybe I just haven't been setting the right news alerts, but it seems to have been quiet in the last little while. I guess there's a lot else going on in the country right now, but yeah.
Yeah, AJ.
Yeah, uh, you may have heard that in October, end of October or something like that. Just a little, slightly different topic, but still something that may be of interest to you. The Putin announced that they had developed a nuclear-powered missile
Mm.
that has unlimited range, so to speak, called Burevestnik, and some of the news outlets kind of poo-pooed it and said that this is really nothing much and all that. And I quite disagree with that because I think that that's really very, very, adds a lot of capability. It goes under the Golden Dome because it flies at like 100 meters, 200 meters. It can go up and down, etc. But so far it's a subsonic. Apparently, it's a subsonic turbine, driven by nuclear power, and it's not very clear exactly what. But have you covered that? Have you thought about covering it or anything like that? Because I think that this is really quite a significant, quite important capability that the Russians have that we do not have. As a deterrence. I don't want to have any kind of a capability to attack or anything, but certainly as a deterrence for something that they may have that the president can have in his back pocket to do bargaining or whatever, that kind of a thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't covered that directly, but I did read about it in the news. And I mean, I agree with you from the perspective of why it's important in particular that de deterrence doesn't work if we don't have something to deter a new technology. Like if there's something that is just technologically overwhelms what we have potentially, then that's a problem. And so I think anytime a country like Russia or from the other side says, we have this thing that's new that you don't have a great defense against, that's probably going to spur the other country to develop a defense against it. And so from our kind of space perspective, I think I don't they don't let me in classified discussions, so I don't know exactly what's going on with it. But I would be very interested in how the government plans to respond. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jim, looks like you
yeah.
was
Let me speak to that. The U.S. looked into that and developed it partially, and found out it was a kind of a Frankenstein weapon.
No, no, no,
It,
no, no, no,
it,
you're
it
wrong.
this
You're
is
wrong.
50
You're talking
years ago,
about Project
60
Pluto.
years ago.
Yeah, you're talking
They,
about Project Pluto. A lot of things have happened since that time.
right, but
That
nuclear reactors are still radioactive if they fly.
no, no, that
And
is
that
not.
we gave up that program because it was too dangerous
I, I,
to test.
I understand that, and that was in 1960s, Project Pluto, Tori 2A, 2C, etc. But that was since that time, a lot of developments have happened in nuclear technology, including thorium molten salt reactor,
Hmm.
with including heat exchangers that can alleviate this radioactive exhaust problem completely.
I disagree.
Okay,
History supports me.
I
history is
do.
I'd like to
history.
make a comment about this sort of thing. Remember, the purpose they're doing is because we've pulled out of ABM treaty and we are talking about Golden Dome. So they're looking at a way to get around it. They're going a little bit, I would call, into the Dr. Strangelove mode. In other words, they can't really outspend us on Golden Dome. So what do? Well, you look at anything else you can come up with, maybe even something kind of scary. And I think that's what they're doing with that.
So you're saying it's
But
not a real weapon, John?
yeah,
No, it'll become a real weapon if, in fact, we deploy Golden Dome. They will, and if this thing works at some level, they'll probably deploy some of them, as they're deploying this crazy submarine with this nuclear torpedo with up to maybe 100 megaton bomb to hit the seashore. I mean, and perhaps seeded. In other words, you're going into what I call the Doctor Strangelove mode, where you can't compete in a normal way, so you do doomsday sort of things. And I think that's the whole risk you have there with this situation.
Well, I can understand. I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, it is true that this thing has worked. And
Oh
whether
yeah.
there is a golden dome or not, it can
Well,
still be very, very. No, no, I mean, golden dome, of course, an issue with this thing, obviously. But even
mhm.
if there is no golden dome, there never was a golden dome. This capability is a huge capability for any country to have, whether it's Russia, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if China also develops the same thing, and some other countries also do the same thing, which is a nuclear powered, um, immense range, immense range missile, and whatever else that can come from it in further development.
Marshall?
Well,
Um, I I'd like to ask you, Sarah, because this is kind of goes on with one of my other problems, is when you get into some project, how do you cut through the economic salesman claims and uh, get comfortable with the fact that some of this technology is actually hocus pocus?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a hard problem, and hocus pocus is a good word. I mean, I think, as a journalist who kind of writes about a lot of things, I'm never going to be like the full expert in any one of them. So I try to go to the
Mhm.
people who are, to take, if I have the economic salesman's claims, to take them to somebody who knows something about, say, nuclear powered cruise missiles, and say, do you think this is bullshit, or do you think this is real? And kind of get a smattering of views on the technical feasibility of something with the details that I have, and see. Yeah, what do you do? How do you cut through? I'm sure you're all doing the same thing.
Uh, I have uh, being a math physicist hardcore computer science, leading edge stuff. I always go down and try to look at the biggest technical problem
Mm.
and make sure that I'm comfortable that it is solvable. And that usually cuts it pretty clearly one way or another. But the hard, you have to have an eyeball, a feeling for what's the really hard physics problem in the problem. And then you have to have a background which says, hey, is it solvable?
Mhm.
Uh, uh, as a journalism major, you're in big trouble right there.
Well, luckily I was a physics major, not a journalism major. So, but
Congratulations.
thanks.
Sarah,
Um,
This is a big part of what the Atlantis project does is kind of cut through which ideas are solid, which ones aren't. And one of the things we came up with is something called an evidence ledger,
mm,
which is an online sort of a open source way of crowdsourcing peer review. So you put up your claims on this evidence ledger, and then people can come and review them, and you hopefully in this way get lots of experts to engage with you and give their feedback.
oh, that's cool. Are everybody's requests and comments public so people can see them, or is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The
Oh,
idea is that
cool.
people involved actually have to provide a little bit of a bio to say who they are and a photo and everything. So you can
Mhm.
theoretically follow up with them if you can get their email address. Yeah.
It's a
That's
great
good.
idea. I'll have to check that out.
Sarah, do any of your editors of the publications you write for call you up and say, do this article, do this topic, do this subject? Do you get marching orders from your publications for any kind of a specific topic or article?
Not usually. They know I'm not very cooperative, so I usually bring I bring my ideas to them. Usually, I think a lot of journalists try to get to the point where editors will bring them ideas so they don't have to think of them. But I am, I'm stubborn and I'm like I like my idea better than yours, so I bring my own usually. I mean, sometimes editors will go back and forth on what's the best way to tackle this or something. But most of them come from me.
So when I look at your bio on your website and it lists publications, so it lists Scientific American, it lists New York Times, WAPO, and a
Mhm.
couple of others. So these are organizations are known to have editorial bias. So on the political side, probably for all I know, on the science side or other sides too. Do you do you have to have your articles editorially approved by their overseers or their editors? And do they apply or filter any kind of bias that you can detect or political bias to what you're writing?
Yeah, I mean, I do work with editors on all of my stories. They don't just let me publish, whatever I turn in. But I think, particularly as a freelancer, like I was saying earlier, even though this article may be for Scientific American or the New York Times or whoever, like I don't work for them. I'm just myself, and I do the same job on every article that I would, regardless of who it was for. And I have not detected a bias, politically or scientifically. I mean, maybe where a bias would come in is, who says yes to an idea? Like, does Scientific American say yes to an article about Breakthrough Starshot and the New York Times doesn't? Like it's in the choosing of what to cover versus what not. And honestly, I have if I don't like the direction an editor is taking a story, like I said, I'm stubborn, so I'll just say, well, I don't like what you're asking for. You came in with a conclusion already. I'm not going to do this story anymore. And I've only had to do that a few times, but maybe three. But I'm always willing to do that.
Do
Good for you. Good for you.
do
Thank
you
you.
do any appreciable video or audio media or print media is your specialty?
Print media usually if it's audio or video, it's something like this where I'm on somebody else's established show. But I am working on a podcast with a friend right now called What I Left Out, and it's journalists telling stories of things they had to cut out of their articles. So things
Is
have
that
been moving.
available now, or
No, it should be in the spring. So
so you don't have a title or where to listen to it or anything like that yet?
it's called What I Left Out, but no, it's just on my hard drive right now, but we're working on it. So
Well, when you put it out there, let me know so I can tell people because I think
okay.
it'd be a fun podcast to
Would
Yeah.
be interesting. Yes.
another hot story that we cover, not call, is health in space, medicine in space, the
Mhm.
national lab, pharma, medical advancements, what they're 3D printing for tissue replacement, Cedars, Sinai's big cardiac program on the space station with the national lab. Do you report on some of the drugs that are being enhanced and improved or drugged, or what microgravity means to people here on Earth? Have you gone that direction yet?
I have not gone deep in that direction in some of the articles I've written. It's been like a small aspect of it, but I am very fascinated by, drug fabrication and research in space. And it's kind of um, surprising and interesting that, developing things and researching things in that environment would, like you said, yield things for Earth. But I'm sure probably some people here are much more experts than me on
This
those
is
things.
a money-making sector. I don't think
Mhm.
it's as big as communication stats yet, but the big pharmas are in it, so they are putting money in it. And some of there's several victories, but the one that they like to talk about is the cancer drug Keytruda
Yeah.
that got enhanced, and that's a huge money maker. But they're working on artificial knees and meniscus repair and cardiac tissue and kidneys and all sorts of stuff. And they're investing money. So that the next big issue I would ask you if you're covering are the new commercial private space stations that are going to replace the ISS. And
Yeah.
I think I'd love to see a really good research article on whether their laboratories are going to be up to the quality of taking over the work of the National Lab on the space station, which is to me, a true national treasure that we're going to deorbit and let burn up. And I personally am skeptical that any of the private labs will be able to replace the national lab either as a whole, all of them working together. That assumes all of them are even successful. We probably won't see all four of the projects being successful. Um, have you looked into that, the private stations, anything like that, anything on the works for that?
Yeah, a bit. Maybe a year and a half ago, I wrote a relatively short article also for Scientific American, kind of taking a look at the major four players and where they stood on things. And what I found, I mean, speaking of what Marshall was asking about earlier, cutting through the economic what you call it, hocus pocus, I think. Um, it was intended to be a long, detailed feature article about exactly what you're talking about. Like, what are the specifications here? What are the specific operational plans? What exact kind of facilities will you have? And there was not a lot of detail and not a lot of people willing to talk about it, but a lot of very flashy websites. And so I think, there's more idea than reality and not a lot of execution yet. And I mean, yeah, I mean, the space station was an international effort that took many years to get going. And these are all companies with unproven business models and without the same kind of incentives to have the rigor that they had. So I am also skeptical, believe it when I see it, especially about the scientific aspects of the research that
You
goes on. A
would,
lot of the companies seem to be focusing on like, do I have a luxury bed for the people who are going to come stay here and not not quite the other stuff. So
so one of the big areas of my skepticism, maybe Jim knows more about it than I do, is I look to see what their power requirements are
Yeah.
and where they're going to get their power, because the lab consumes a lot of power for these experiments. And also, it most of the time they have to have vibration proofing. Uh, so because some of these experiments and things that they do, the vibrations on the medical and some of that technology can be lethal. And I don't see that kind of information, like how much power is available to the lab, how much power might be available to an individual experimenter. Can the power be all at once, or does it have to be rationed? I don't see that kind of information. I know that'd be a really detailed article, and I do not think the people doing the stations will talk publicly about this kind of information. I may be wrong about that, but I think that they safeguard information for a lot of reasons, and maybe some of those reasons are that they just plain don't have it, but hope to have it, and they don't want to put it out there. Uh, Anybody else have a comment on this? I'm concerned that these
Yeah.
stations will not be adequate replacements for the ISS and the International Lab, which to me is a national treasure.
I agree.
Yes, I could speak to that.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, in space stations, that is the private ones, it's very much like Marshall was saying earlier. There are a lot of examples of the phrase is big hat, no cattle. No detail, no, because they haven't really paid attention to the realities. Power availability on orbit is a serious problem. Vibration is not well understood publicly to be a major problem in space because there's no damping. If things vibrate forever, and in fact, in space telescopes, my son tells me, who's the chief scientist of the Roman telescope to be launched in September, handling damping is a major factor in the physical configuration of the space telescopes to keep damping down. Because if the telescope wiggles, you don't get images. And that's true of many things that happen in space. Damping is a major requirement, and it requires hardware, and that means mass, and it also means energy. So, I think the commercial space stations that go up, maybe starting next year, are going to face a lot of obstacles. There's going to be a lot of attrition in that business.
Any other comments on that from some of you in the audience?
Not on that, but I'll just say that I wonder if fusion is also suffering from the same kind of issues. And Sarah, have you covered this type of thing about fusion? So many companies are getting so much money without any cattle, or
Right.
whatever those kinds of things. And General Fusion is going to go public maybe in 6 months with a SPAC at $1 billion, something like that. Commonwealth Fusion is doing a lot of other, money raising, etc. They are able to raise the money. So is this also big hat and no cattle type of thing, or what do you think?
I mean, that's always the joke about fusion, isn't it? That it's always 20 years
Yeah,
away.
right.
And
Yeah, 20 years away or
Well, the
something.
yeah,
fact,
I mean, I think remains to be seen whether that is the case. Also, sorry if you can hear my dog barking at the UPS guy outside, but
Yeah.
the yeah, I mean, I think, that every generation has its suite of fusion companies and people who are going to fund them, and it does seem like they're making some technical progress. I've more written on the side of the Department of Energy labs that are doing some of the
Hmm.
basic fundamental research on the fusion reaction with their large facilities that you could never commercialize, but making progress. But I mean, I think, yeah, for fusion, the way I think of it as a journalist is a little on the side of what Marshall and I were talking about earlier of don't write
Focus.
about it till you see it. Yeah.
tourism is still
Yeah.
2 years away because we really, despite the tourism we've had, do not have what would be defined as true commercial space tourism. So that joke was always space tourism is 2 years away, and we do have it with Blue Origin, but to me that's not commercial. So commercial is you can go in and buy a damn ticket, you know when it's going to fly, where it's going to fly, and anyone can buy the ticket. And that's not so with Blue Origin, and that's not so with the tourist kind of flights that have been on Dragon and stuff. So yes, it's plausible, it's happening, but it's not a commercial venture yet. Um,
Yeah.
So back to
Yeah.
space stations.
Joe, yeah, Joe.
I actually have two dogs in this fight because I have an investment in Axiom and an investment in Voyager, which has Starlab. There are a wide variety of realities to what people are doing in this industry, right? Actually, the company I think that's the most interesting in this industry, actually, because they're doing single purpose stations, is Vast.
Is that I agree with you on that. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing something really practical. They're doing something that's like single purpose. So you don't get some of the cross-contamination problems that you get with the ISS. Like, you're trying to do a crystal experiment and there's astronauts jumping around in the next room, and stuff like that, right? So I think Vast actually, like, there's a niche for Vast. Unfortunately, I didn't get to invest in Vast.
And aren't they set to be first, at least according to their own timeline, if anybody believes that?
They have a module that was going to fly this year, actually, but I think now it's been delayed till 2027. So, and what's more, they're a single launch space station, so they fit on a Falcon 9, right? Which is kind of cool. Like in terms of like one of the things I look at when I invest in companies is what are the practical steps that you're going to take to reduce risk and get between here and the thing you need $1 billion for. If somebody comes in and says, "Well, I need $1 billion to test my idea," I know it immediately at that point in the talk that this is not a serious player. So Axiom is kind of doing the building their own ISS modules. Right. They're using Alenia to build Thales Alenia is building the modules. There's actual modules that are being built. They went through a real funding problem a couple of years ago. But now that everybody wants to invest in space stuff, apparently they're not having any trouble raising money now. Because literally it's like the whole market has opened up for this stuff in the last like 24 months. Like 24 months ago, it was really, really hard to raise any money for any space company. And all of the space companies went through that little funding drought, right? And then there's Starlab, which I keep seeing press releases about and actual tiny little things that have to do with hardware, but I don't know how. Starlab is kind of on the bubble with me. It's kind of like, is that really going to happen or not? Right? I think Axiom will happen, and I'm almost sure Vast will happen. And Blue Origin is like, just give me a break, right? I have no idea what they're doing, and I'm not sure they do either.
Well, Vast is the one that's not taking federal money, correct?
Right. Vast is the one that's actually doing a completely private space station.
Right.
Axiom, Starlab, and I think Blue, but I could be wrong about that, are in the NASA follow-on space stations program. So they've gotten grants from NASA or contracts from NASA to build specific things.
Jim, what do you say about the stations and
Well, the stations, I agree with what he just said, what Joe said, and I think it's going to be quite an elimination happening as there is right now in electric vehicles. Let me speak to the fusion question because I started working on fusion in 1965 and spent 15 years on it, and I follow it closely. I think fusion is going to come in the 1930s. However, most of the firms in it now are going to fail. The most likely successful one will be these days everything is an acronym, so they call themselves TAE, but its real name is Tri-Alpha Energy in Orange County, California. they have demonstrated classical diffusion in their reverse field configuration, which is the fundamental thing you have to do to make a viable reactor. And they have the money now of more than $1 billion. And they're going to have an initial 100 megawatt level reactor in the early 30s. And they're looking for a site already so I think they're likely to succeed. But most of the tokamak-based ones will not succeed because tokamaks do not scale successfully. They're simply too elephantine. That is, they're too big. They're, minimum size a gigawatt, whereas other reactor types are minimum size of 50, 100 megawatts. It's much easier to do.
I forget the name of the MIT venture capital fusion company.
Commonwealth,
Commonwealth.
Commonwealth.
But they have raised hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
You tell me that they're not likely to succeed?
Well, $1 billion is greater than 100 million. Well, I don't think tokamaks scale correctly. I think to be brief about it, they're I don't think they're viable at the level that it's commercial.
Sarah, if you're taking notes, you have
Yeah, no, I should be. I should be.
story
I'll have to go back and
ideas.
watch it on YouTube.
You
I
got a
think
lot of
Marshall's been
story
trying to,
ideas,
yeah.
for the future if any of these things
You guys are going to keep me busy
light
for the
you
next
up.
few months. I think
Marshall,
Marshall's been jumping in. Yeah.
Yeah. I've noticed that David covered the space stations for medical work, and there's also space stations for astronomy. And my favorite one is space stations to do maintenance of all the other satellites, bringing them in and upgrading them and and relaunching them because it's so much cheaper if you just fix them instead of sending up a new one. Uh, from your view, what's your favorite idea of a good business for a space station that might actually pay off big?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess how does it pay off big is always the question, especially for, all these companies that get lots of money and then maybe don't have a lot to return. Um, I think I might have to go with drug development, pharmaceutical
Yeah.
stuff.
Mhm.
Just, it's an industry with a lot of money
Yeah.
behind it,
Mhm.
and if the development works, I think I could see them being willing to invest
Yeah.
in that. Fixing satellites in them is an intriguing prospect, although there's also, proposals in development to do it with other robot satellites instead, although that also seems
Mhm.
very hard and complicated from an international perspective. But yeah, I think I would have to go with drug development and
Yeah.
manufacturing.
And space tourism, David's PhD idea, you put that as what, three or four?
Yeah, I don't know how much space tourism is gonna, how much money it's gonna make. I feel like every time I write about it, I find economic models in both directions. Like there will be enough demand for this, or there will be no demand for this, and so I feel
Mhm.
like it's the kind of thing where you have to see when it exists, if people actually pay for it or not, and then watch people go out of business or stay in business, depending on
um,
how it goes.
everyone, we're coming up on a 2 hour program, so I want to ask one question. Then, if anybody has a really, really concise comment or question, I will take it. But on Tuesday, Dr. Ethan Siegel, who is a noted astrophysicist, you may know of him and all of that,
Mhm.
Mhm.
he was on the show, and his focus is everything should be about science, and I really mean everything. He doesn't see commercial lunar. Why? It's worthless, nothing there. Even when I ask him questions about pharma and maybe benefiting him with medication or his family, he downplayed that, but did talk a little bit about prioritizing the budget to maybe give a little bit of money over here to pharma, but science for everything, and settlement, all of this other out the window. Um, how do you see space being divided and budgets being divided between commercial, like people like on the space show? I mean, we're all about commercial space, and those that think science is it, that's it. Science has got to be about space. So I'm interested in, as a journalist, how you see that. I'm sure you've come across that before.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with Ethan on that one. I think, science journalists and scientists who do work just on the science side of space kind of always skew toward thinking about space just in those terms, in the scientific terms. And I think in reality, it's never been that way. It's always been political and economic and commercial and policy based. And there's just like, there's always been this whole, you
Yeah.
know, whole set of lenses of different ways to look at and think about space. And if you're in science, you get kind of tunnel visioned on that. And so, yeah, I think commercial defense, things with economic implications and also just exploration. I think all of those are very important to space and always have been. So
Uh,
Ethan and I can agree to disagree.
closing
Agree,
com
agree, agree
closing
with you.
comment from you or anyone else. Sarah, do you have a closing comment? Or looks like Jim wants to jump in.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah that when you consider the development of pharmaceuticals in orbit, which is about fixing people, so to speak, that's far more remunerative than fixing satellites.
Yeah, since it's benefited my family already, I'm a big believer in it, but I put it out there because I do have a bias. But many of you in our Zoom room today were on that Ethan Siegel show. And so I don't think any of you agree that we should be all science and downplay everything else, including lunar development, which I also believe it is important to have a presence on the moon, both commercially and from a national security sense. And, if we ignore it and we're going to be science only, you tell me that China's going to do that, and you tell me that Russia and others are going to do it. So I think people that have that focus are geopolitically deaf, dumb, and blind. And
Well,
and if
all
you
science
don't
gets
believe, wait a
cancelled.
minute, if you don't see the geopolitics and necessities of it in our world related to space, then I think you're deaf, dumb, and blind too. Now, how you allocate budgets and things, that's a whole different story because people with different interests get involved in the budget process, especially in this country. But space is geopolitical, and there are national security and national interests for us and other countries, and we can't just ignore that.
Well, look at the hearings for the NASA administrator, right? There were only two. There were only two things that really came up in those hearings. One is how do we beat China, or
Right.
are we not going to beat China, or something about China, and how do I save the NASA center in my district from being closed by you? Basically, people are either talking their book or they're talking about China. So, like, that just tells you that doing science only is the way you get the program canceled.
Any other comments or closing comments, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, thank you guys for having me. It's been a good discussion. It's nice to talk to people so knowledgeable about so many different aspects of space and Earth. So, yeah, good discussion. Thank you.
Jim, did you want to real quickly?
Yeah, one of my final remark. If you want to know what aspect of space is important in our future, go back 500 years and think, well, Christopher Columbus just discovered the Western Hemisphere, although he didn't know it. So what avenue of human achievement will be important in the Western Hemisphere? The right answer was everyone. Every single thing is important in space.
Absolutely. And I say always that the path through peace goes through space, and I still believe that today. And I do think that space has the potential to positively impact every person on Earth, despite the politicians and the crap that happens and the misfires and the this and the that. Overall, space is probably the best potential for our future. And I hope our educational systems are up to it. I have doubts about that. And I hope you hear me criticize our political leaders almost routinely. I don't think they're up to it. I wish they were, but hopefully we can improve that. But space is critical to ourselves and our future generations, our kids, and it's critical to a better and safer and peaceful world. And I believed that when I started the space show, and I still believe it's even more so today. So
You're here.
Yeah.
I want to appreciate everybody for being here. Sarah, thank you for returning to the show. We will
Thank you.
continue to follow your articles and see how many new ideas you actually write about from
Okay, I gotta go through my new list
what the
and see
people
what
on the
shakes out.
show talk about. And listeners, Mark Whittington is back on Sunday, and Greg Autry is our guest on Tuesday. So everybody have a great weekend. As we like to say, keep looking up. Thank you to Sarah, Jim, Marshall, Joe, John, AJ, and Phil. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
thanks.